The Top Floor Please podcast, where women in leadership rise together. I'm your host, Melissa McCormick, executive coach and founder of the Grace and Salt Leadership Academy. This is your space to find clarity, grow in confidence, and lead with bold authenticity. Whether you're navigating the boardroom, building your team, or stepping into new territory, you're not alone. Let's talk real challenges, real growth, and real leadership because the top floor isn't just a place, it's a mindset. Alrighty then, let's get started. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Top Floor Please podcast. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Melissa McCormick, and I am really excited to be here today. This is the first episode of 2026. So this is January 5th of 2026. And this episode really fits in a good spot, right? So we're at the start of the new year. We're stepping into Epiphany, if you're familiar with that term. And tomorrow, January 6th, we celebrate my grandson Finn's second birthday. So this is just a perfect opportunity for those three things to collide. And I'm gonna guess that at first you're gonna be like, what is she talking about, right? Like, Melissa, what does the start of the new year, what does Epiphany, and what does Finley, Rowan, Lance have anything to do with each other, right? They seem like they're three separate moments, but they are not. And just kind of go with me on this one, and you'll get it, right? So when I was creating this and thinking about January 6th, which is a very important day for me, yes, it's Finn's birthday, but it also is Epiphany, which is very important, just start of the new year and helps us with revelation. So when I started slowing down, thinking about these three events that coincide, I realized that really they have a lot to do with leadership and performance. And so this is why I say this. So the first one is I just want to talk a little bit about Epiphany, and I want to challenge you or to encourage you to look at the start of the new year differently, and that's through the lens of Epiphany. So Epiphany is about revelation. It's about seeing and moving. It's about light being revealed, right? The star being revealed. It wasn't created, it's not forced, it's not hustled into existence, right? Light was being revealed. And I really think that matters because January is usually when we feel pressure to do more. It's like, what did you do? And like I spent over Christmas break, I spent many hours evaluating and just reviewing 2025. So this is a habit that I think all of us should get into, even if you are not in a leadership position, but you are an individual contributor. And that is, what did you do this year? And what went right, what went wrong, what would you have done differently? Those types of things. So I go through that, even though I'm an entrepreneur and I have a very small business, I still go through it to say, okay, what went right? What went wrong? What do I want to continue to do? What do I want to stop doing? What those types of things. So it's about evaluation. So I spent time over between Christmas and New Year's looking at that. And so when we get to January, excuse me, I got a tickle in my throat and I'm probably getting a cold, but excuse me. But when we get to January, it's like, oh, okay, now we got to hit the ground running and we got to go, 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 go. We had our time to rest and relax where the world kind of just stopped and was put on pause. We're always feeling this pressure to do more, especially if you're a high achiever, high performer. Set bigger goals, move faster, prove something. You might not be that way, but I am that way. I don't know if that's in my DNA or if I don't think I was really raised that way, but it came from somewhere, right? This drive, this inner drive, it came from somewhere. And it's really been hard for me to slow down. I don't know if I mentioned this to you before or not, but I hired a business coach in September. And I did that because I've had coaches throughout the last 6 years. And because of finances or circumstances or whatever, you've got a coach, then you let a coach go. It's kind of like I'm a huge tennis buff, and so I'll be watching uh, the WTA or the ATP, the guys tour or the gals tour, and all of a sudden somebody has a different coach. Well, wait a minute, they had that coach for a really long time. They had a connection. Why would they change coaches? Well, you change coaches because maybe you need just a little different perspective. So that's what I did in 2024, 2025. And so I hired a new coach in September. I knew I needed one. And I really believe that God put, her name is Jennifer, and I really believe that God put her in my path for us to connect so that she can help me grow my business, but not only grow my business, but help with my mindset on accepting where I am, right? I'm a big goal gal and I'm a big, metrics person and I want to meet the goals. I'm very competitive. And so at this time in my life to not do that, to tell other people to surrender your life and look at where God's leading you and follow and try to not control everything. That's really, really different for me. And that's really, really hard for me. So as we go through January, and I'm going to be talking about goals next week, you're going to hear a podcast about goals. It doesn't mean that we aren't goal setters when we surrender our business or when we surrender our future, if you will. It just means that we're a little bit more on a scavenger hunt, and I'll explain that next week. So that's just my little tease for our goal setting podcast next week. But I want to get back to, sorry, I got off on a tangent here. I want to get back to Epiphany. Epiphany, it invites us to pause and ask a different question. What am I being invited to see differently this year? And that connects with my comment about surrendering and letting God lead your life and lead your professional career and everything that's going on within your world, right? What am I being invited to see differently this year? That's revelation. That's epiphany. That, by the way, is where the term came from. Oh, I had an epiphany. You know that term? Yeah. Oh, I had an epiphany. Yeah, it comes from this season when in January. And typically it's the church calendar, so there's scholars and I'm not educated enough in the biblical calendar to say this is when Epiphany happens, but it doesn't matter. January 6th is Day of Epiphany. That's what the church says that it is. And I just want to use that term as we talk, as we think about 2026 and how we're going through the year. What am I being invited to see differently this year? Because leadership doesn't start with action, it starts with perception. Before we perform, we perceive. Does that make sense? Right? Do you understand that? Leadership doesn't start with action. It starts with perception. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit here. What I see in my coaching work again and again, especially with high performing women, they don't lack drive. They've got drive like in spades, right? They don't lack discipline. They don't lack commitment. What they often lack is clarity. Now, I say that's high performing women, but that goes with high performing men too, right? You don't lack drive. Like, no, you don't lack the drive. You don't lack the discipline. You don't lack the commitment, but you do lack clarity. And without clarity, performance becomes exhausting. Is that where you are? Is that where this podcast is finding you today? That you are go, 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 go. Now it's January. You want to hit the ground running. Maybe you're in sales and you've got numbers to hit, or maybe you're a business owner like me and you have cash flow and you have revenue and you have employees that you're responsible for, right? Is that what's happening to you? So let's focus on clarity in this month of January. You see, Epiphany, it reminds us that the wisest leaders aren't the ones who push hardest. They're the ones who notice first. Okay? Yeah, let me say that again. Epiphany reminds us that the wisest leaders aren't the ones who push the hardest. They're the ones who notice first. They notice what's shifting. They notice what's no longer aligned. They notice when a season has changed and it's time to pivot. Performance that's rooted in clarity feels different. It's focused, it's intentional, it's sustainable, right? Yeah. So we talked about Epiphany, a different way to start the new year. We talked a bit about leadership and performance. Now, what in the world does Finn's second birthday have to do with any of this? And it has to do with a lesson in becoming, right? Tomorrow is Finn's birthday, his second birthday. Birthdays, especially when you watch a child grow, aren't about achievement. They're about becoming, right? He knows when I say something to him, my he calls me Yaya, and which I love, by the way. I love that. And it's a funny story behind how that came about because I just didn't know, right? He sets a standard for any other grandchild. Whatever Finn calls me is going to be what everybody calls me. And I didn't know. I didn't know if I was going to be grandma. I didn't know who I was going to be until he wanted to get my attention. And so he pounds on the counter and he says, Yaya. And there it's stuck, right? So Yaya is my name. And I love that very, very much. But he is, well, he's a pistol for sure, but he is growing and learning. And it is so amazing to see how he can figure out how buckles go together or light switches go on and off or opens up a drawer or he knows what is behind it. He's remembered, he's watching everything because he's growing, right? Birthdays are not about achievements when you're 2 years old. It's about growth. Quite frankly, that's what all birthdays should be about, right? Children don't perform to earn their value. They grow because they're nurtured, because they're taught, because they're loved, because they're wired to learn. Somewhere along the way, many of us learned that being capable, being dependable, and responsible earned approval. So therefore, performance became our currency. But leadership is not about proving, it's about stewardship. It's about who you're becoming. It's about serving others. So as I think about Epiphany, a new year, and a birthday all at once, I can't help but ask this. What if this year isn't about doing more, but about becoming more aligned? Yeah, that and this lesson, even though, yes, it's a podcast for everybody, excuse me, but honestly, that's my question of the year. What if this year isn't about doing more, but about becoming more aligned? That is what I'm going to do. I always, and not always, but for the most part, I try to choose a word of the year. My word for 2026 is surrender. And I did that on purpose so that I can continue to remember that I'm not in charge and I need to become more aligned with what's God's future or mission of this organization that I'm building, Grace, that we are building, Grace and Salt Leadership Academy. What does that look like? So what does that look like in your world, right? What if this year isn't about doing more, but about becoming more aligned with your boss, with the organization, with your spouse, with your friends, with your family? Yeah. So instead of piling on resolutions, which if you've been following me for a bit, I don't believe in resolutions. I call them commitments. I think a resolution can be well, you can just forget about them. I like to call them commitments because that to me is like a promise. So, but instead of piling on resolutions or even commitments, here's my offer. I got 3 questions that I want you to sit with as we begin 2026. Okay. So for the next week, before the next podcast drops, I want you to think about these 3 questions. One is, what truth is being revealed to me right now? So write that down. What truth, if you're not driving, what truth is being revealed to me right now? Where am I striving instead of stewarding? Good one. Where am I striving? Where am I continually trying to get instead of stewarding others and those that you're supposed to serve? And finally, the last question I want you to sit with for this next week is, what does faithful leadership look like in this season of my life? Okay. What truth is being revealed to me right now? Where am I striving instead of stewarding? And what does faithful leadership look like in this season of my life? Because clarity fuels performance and stillness makes space for clarity. So, as we move into this new year, my hope for you is this. My hope is that you lead from what's been revealed, not what you feel pressured to prove. That your performance is rooted in purpose, not exhaustion. And that your leadership reflects who you are becoming, not just what you're accomplishing. All right, everyone, thank you so much for hanging out on the top floor. If today's episode gave you something to think about, just share it with somebody that you love, a leader that you admire, work folks, whoever it is in your world. And if you're ready to rise, find your voice, and lead with clarity and confidence, we'd love to connect. So visit graceandsaltleadership.com to learn how Grace and Salt Leadership Academy can support your leadership journey. And remember, you don't have to lead like everyone else. You just lead like you. All right, until next time, and I wish you a wonderful January, well, day of Epiphany. All right, take care, everyone. Thanks so much for hanging out on the top floor. If today's episode gave you something to think about or a little boost, share it with your friends to keep the momentum going. And hey, if you're ready to rise, find your voice, and lead with clarity and confidence, we'd love to connect with you. Reach out at graceandsaltleadership.com to learn how Grace and Salt can support your growth. Remember, you don't have to lead like everyone else. Just lead like you. All right, I'll see you next time on the top floor.